Hello and welcome to the Grid Podcast, your podcast about our electricity networks in the UK and their role at the heart of our transition to electrification. We are back today with another podcast in our Capacity Crunch mini-series. I'm here, Brian Moorhead, regular host, with David McDonald, also regular co-host. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, afternoon.
So it's been a while since we've recorded a podcast. We've been pretty busy this last few months, and also we've tried to sit down to do this podcast a few times, but as you'll hear as the podcast goes on, things have been changing so rapidly. Every time we come up with a script, it's almost like the script's written up.
Rewrite it again.
Yeah, it's like out of date by the time we come to sit down to record the thing. Such is the pace of change in our industry at the minute. It is crazy. But today's episode, I think we're going to call The State of Play in May. So effectively, it's just a little bit of an update as to where we are on the capacity crunch in our GB electricity networks. And as I'm sure, some of the interest and inquiries we're getting at the minute, it definitely is becoming a much bigger topic across not just, it was the renewable industry probably large scale first of all. This is massively spreading into, EV charging, large scale housing developers are wanting to talk to us about it, industrial and logistics people, data centers and everything else. The race for
it's right across the board, isn't it now?
Yeah. So the capacity crunch is really pretty much impacting just about anything, any type of development or anything that connects to the grid.
Yeah.
Pretty much anywhere in GB. So this episode is just a bit of an update. Well, what is the capacity crunch? What does it look like at the minute? And we're going to put some numbers and facts out there to actually illustrate the problem we face. And if we look back to the last capacity crunch episode we did, I'm pretty sure at the time when this was all starting to happen, we drew the conclusion that, the issue might not be our lines, wires and substations running hot. There's quite a big issue with the whole process and how capacity is allocated on our grid.
Yep.
We'll go through the numbers on this episode, which, spoiler alert, probably back up what we thought was happening. In the next episode, which is going to come very soon after this, so I know we have been away for a bit, but we promise to be back more regular on the podcast. You will get an episode pretty quick after this on connection reform. So this episode is about outlining what the capacity crunch currently looks like, the numbers behind it, the issues. In the following episode then, National Grid ESO has just recently announced and sort of published their regulation modification cost mod proposals. I don't want to get into the technical lingo.
Don't go too techy on us.
Yeah, for outlining how they're going to change up the system. So if you remember back, the Prime Minister of the UK, I think around autumn time, announced the intention to change the system from a first come, first serve for grid capacity to first ready, first connect. And now we're sort of,
it's a big statement.
Huge, and that was followed up by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think it was the Chancellor of the Exchequer put the deadline of January 2025 on it. So we now have some publications out from National Grid ESO, or I suppose they're going to be called NESO very soon as they get deprivatized. So came one of the other many changes in our industry. So that'll be the follow up to this. So this is looking at what is the issue where we're at, and we'll follow up in that reform piece. So
kind of on that then. So what are the numbers? What are the numbers?
What has been happening? So currently, as it stands in the UK, and no doubt this will be out of date as soon as we publish this podcast, there's over 700 gigawatts of capacity in the queue with accepted offers to connect. So there'll be another, I don't know how many, maybe gigawatts of applications sitting there since. But just to put a bit of flavour, before we go any further, I should explain what a gigawatt is, maybe just for some, we might have a lot of listeners who work in the megawatt scale that wouldn't even be familiar with a gig. So a gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts, which is
times 10 to the
a million kilowatts. If you want a kind of a barometer, it takes 1.21 gigawatts.
Gigawatts is how the Americans might say.
Gigawatts to time travel in Back to the Future in a DeLorean It takes in 2023, it took 44 gigawatts to hit GB's peak demand based on the latest National Grid stats.
44.
44, gigawatts.
We're saying there's 700 in the queue.
There's 700 gigawatts in the queue. It takes about 14 gigawatts to keep the lights on in GB at the minimum demand, sort of middle of the summer. And I'm pretty sure the stat for last year for peak was 44 gigawatts. It's been hovering in around the 50 gigawatt stage. Yep. 44 actually seemed quite low. But interestingly as well, the max demand in GB has actually steadily been dropping. So I think it was about 60 gigawatts maybe 10 years ago or so. But demand is forecast to rise with electrification, but it's only forecast to rise to in and around the 100 to 120 gigawatt level by 2050. By 2050. So that's the grid demand expected by 2050. After,
so we have all the offers out there that we need.
Well, there's that, and then there's also like the forecast renewables needed, and again, like, so the forecast battery storage needed by 2050, depending on the scenario, is anywhere between 20 to 70 gigawatts. Forecast is it onshore solar, maybe in around the, I can't remember, sorry, if it's onshore solar and wind or all solar and wind in its entirety, but it's in around like the 100 gigawatts or of that order. But we've got, I think there's well over 600 gigawatts of renewables in the queue, including storage. There's at least kind of 220 gigawatts of that is energy storage capacity as well, against a 2050 need of somewhere in the region of 20 to 70.
Yep.
So oversubscribed 3 to 4 times. And that's accepted connection offers. In April 2024 alone, there was, I just want to read the stats in front of me. Yeah, there was 10 gigawatts of connection offers accepted, deposits paid in 1 month alone. So that's why these stats are going to be out of date. So that has been hovering around about 4 gigawatts, 4,000 megawatts worth of connection offers being accepted, deposits paid a month has been the rough run rate for the last number of months. But in April, that actually jumped to 10 gigawatts. So the scale of the issue is getting out of control month on month on month. It's just absolutely ludicrous.
It's crazy. The numbers are mental.
It doesn't make any sense. So when it comes to people getting very frustrated with some of the 2038 connection dates and getting frustrated with the network operators and the DNOs, well, the one thing to bear in mind is, well, actually, like, when you're sitting down to look at the electrical system, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense in 2050, never mind today, when you start trying to actually model these connections.
And these accepted offers, and they must have reinforcements associated with them.
Yeah, so that's it. So a lot of those offers coming back now will have these kind of silly 2030 dates because, they're at the end of a very, very, very long queue. Yeah. So, but obviously the big kind of thing here is there's a lot of stuff in that queue will never connect, will never materialize. There's
and are they shovel ready project? We come to like first come first serve.
Yeah. So going back to probably one of our older episodes, a lot of this has been like at transmission level. You could go in with a 5 gigawatt project, book up 5 gigawatts, 5,000 megawatts of capacity without even having land allocated. Never mind having planning or anything else. So, there's huge speculation in that queue. That will never, solar farms that would need so many acres of land that it'll never be viable and all sorts of things going on. Which is basically, I think, what we probably said a lot of months ago in our old episode, that there's so much speculation here and it's gumming up the system.
And then touching in on that in terms of like the lines, wires, transformers, are they stuffed? Are they running hot? What is the crack?
So I think that's very, very interesting. So the figures we've just been quoting, we'll put links probably in the description for this, by the way. So we have a few different graphs in front of us that I'm going to read too. So those overall queue stats, those are ENA published. So that's the Energy Networks Association. The next stat I'm going to come to then to basically illustrate the issue and the proof in the pudding about what I'm saying, that the problem here isn't that our lines and wires are running hot. It's more of a capacity allocation and process and queuing issue. So I'm looking at a graph from a Regen report. So Regen, very credible organisation in our sector. If you haven't heard of them, do give them a shout and look them up. They've done a report where they've drawn data from the DNO network headroom reports, and the graph here pretty much looks at every 5 years, so 2025, 2030, 2035, out to 2050. And it's
It's like a price review.
primary substations require an upgrade across GB. So basically, they require an upgrade when they hit their capacity. According to this report, the DNOs reckon about 9% of their primary substations need upgrades, roughly speaking, at the minute, rising to 23% by 2030 and 45% by 2035, kind of topping out by around 66% by 2050. So as it stands today, based on that report, you're looking at 91% of substations more than likely have some level of capacity at a
distribution level.
That's primary substations at a distribution level. The most common type of substation that most people would be interacting with, unless you're connecting something at a very large scale.
Yep.
So that's one graph that gives you a bit of evidence that there is a lot of capacity down in the distribution network. The second one I'm going to touch on, and again we will reference, is a recent UKPN report, which is really, really useful. So UKPN are really good on their stats, by the way. Even some of their open data portal stuff and everything else is very good. So they basically did a utilization summary. So basically of the capacity available at different substation types, what's the current levels of utilization on them, and consequently then
the subsequent headroom.
Yeah, the headroom's the bit that's not being used. So on their grid level substations across their 3 license areas, their average utilization sitting in around 57 or 58%. So again, a lot of headroom there.
Yep.
At
primary, and that's taken into account, a dual transformer site or whatever. So actually, the headroom is actually quite.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of capacity. Yeah.
Yep.
At a primary substation level, then down into sort of 33 kV 11, they're saying the utilization sitting between 61 to 65%. So again, the guts of sort of 35 to 40% capacity available on average. And then they do go into pole mounted transformers, which is more local level. It's at like 34%. And then ground mounted transformers, those little secondary subs, they're down in at the 40% sort of figure. So again, when you're looking at very local level, plugging in some EV chargers or whatever, there's a lot of capacity on the network for that at those levels. So, basically what does that all point to? There's lots of capacity embedded in our distribution networks across GB, but the big blocker is, it's a bit like a road network. You're looking your way up the different network tiers to hit transmission, and it's actually transmission that's becoming this big blocker because of the national queue at transmission level that you're kind of coming in at the back of.
And when you're down at that local level, even if there's some like cable upgrades or whatever required, those are all manageable within a time scale or whatever, as opposed to just like the substation level.
And that's the other thing driving the dates then. So if you have distribution reinforcement required, well, that typically happens a lot quicker. Obviously, it's an inconvenience and it can be risky or costly, albeit some of the costs have been removed now with the SCR, which we did an episode on probably this time last year, actually. But yeah, transmission upgrades, massive lead time. You're probably talking on average like 7 years or something for a transmission project if everything goes to plan. You have kit that probably has a 2 to 3 year lead time. You normally have planning consents, a lot, public communities to get on board and all that type of thing.
They're very much like national scale type projects, even like a railway infrastructure build or whatever.
Yeah, which I think the National Infrastructure Report, did it look at, average time to complete new transmission lines is currently sitting at something like 14 years.
Yeah, and I think the challenge was to get it to 7 maybe.
I think you're right. Yep. So, 7's like a new world
and
best.
How would you make it 5?
Yeah, new world best case, which is driving, that's the thing behind these 2038 connection dates and everything else. So that's a bit of a very quick high level summary on what the capacity crunch looks like. The state of play in May rolls off the tongue. 2024. To summarize key points, really, huge connection queues. Basically gumming up the system. They're taking up a lot of time and headspace in the network companies as well, which is effectively preventing the shovel ready or the real projects getting through. This all did start this was mainly in the renewable sector, but one of the big things we've seen in the last year is this is massively spreading into demand.
Yeah,
so
and we're seeing that with our customers, aren't we now?
Yeah, big time. So actually, a stat I didn't give is so out of the 700 gigawatts, that is largely renewable and battery storage. There's 47 gigawatts of that is actual demand projects. Plus, you've got this thing of the 220 or 230 gigawatts of storage also has an import capacity element.
Yep.
Now, there was reg changes made that shouldn't really compete with demand projects, but again, what we're seeing on the ground is that National Grid maybe haven't gotten around to actually applying their new modelling assumptions as well.
Yep.
And then we've also seen at a distribution level, the DNOs have given firm demand capacity to battery storage as well. So there's a number more detailed and nuanced points in this that is gumming up the system as well for demand connections. And we'll come to it in our next episode on the connection reform, but I do think we do need to have a serious conversation in GB around, is it fair or right that new homes or new factories and things like that are being caught up in this mess and held back when, like battery storage isn't there to take that. Battery storage is there to help
the network.
Help the network.
Yep.
And I do think even from a battery developer perspective, we're facing an uphill task as it is to get the general public on board with the transition to net zero. If things start hitting the headlines around how these battery containers are stopping them, having people having new homes to live in or a new factory to work in, then that makes the getting people on board that bit more challenging.
Like as a former network planner, you should model the network as it operates instead of.
So I think we did touch on it. They are looking at this in the P28 working group. So we'll not get into the detail today. That this is very much a high level update. So yeah, I think that the conclusion in a nutshell is there's a massive process issue here. And so the natural question is, well, how are we going to solve it, or how are the network companies going to solve it? Which leads very nicely into part two. So yes, that's us in this part of the episode. We are going to move into the next episode then, just to give everybody a break. And we will be back talking about connection reform and what National Grid is proposing to do about this issue.
No, look, thanks for the numbers. I think it really brings good context of actually where the issues are at and where we need to get to. And episode 2 will pick up on some of those reforms that is required to get us connected and meet our net zero targets.
Okay.
Cheers.
We'll see you in the next episode.